Today I'm joined by Justice Morath. Justice Morath is Associate Professor of Psychology at Salt Lake Community College. He is also Membership Director of the Association for Science Communicators, serving on the board alongside his wife. He is the author of Science is a Journey, The Wisdom of a Thousand Faces. Welcome, Justice. Thanks for being on the Fancy Comma YouTube.
Hello, yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I'll let you explain what the book's about, but it does overall talk about the process that scientists use to find knowledge, the history of empiricism, which you describe really well in the book. Then you talk about non-Western philosophies of knowledge and theories of knowledge. And you talk about the hero's journey in science. And it's really cool that this book is going to be available on your website, freely available to everyone to read and learn about science. So tell us about your book. It's called Science is a Journey, The Wisdom of a Thousand Faces. What's your book about? Who's it for? And what do you hope people will take from your book? What takeaways people will get from your book?
Kind of start with what the purpose of writing it was, and that was, I teach psychology at a community college, and then I also do all this science communication also on the side, and science topics like popular science books are all over the place. There's lots of great ones, but I found that there was never very many that really covered the actual process of science, right? So we can think of some great books, like for example, Ed Young's like An Immense World, or Immense Worlds, I think is his new one, right? Really amazing book, but like all these popular science books, they don't go into some of the nuts and bolts of like, what's an independent variable? What's a dependent variable? Right. And so I wanted to create a book that talked about that and also talked a little bit about the history of science and where it comes from. And I'm not a historian, but, oftentimes I think if anything, what COVID showed us is a general misunderstanding of what the process of science looks like. A lot of people, didn't trust the scientists because they're like, well, they were telling us this one thing last year and now they're telling us this different thing. And that's really science working. And so the purpose of the book was try to share, what the process of science looks like, and at a very introductory level too. So not really getting too bogged down in a lot of details, just kind of for a reader who's just interested in understanding some of that background of science. And then also, as you mentioned, with like non-Western philosophies and things, a lot of the history of science is very whitewashed. We don't talk about, the aspects of science that we saw outside of Western Europe in its origins. And so I wanted to also try to address that and make sure that that's on record more. So yeah, the target audience, it could certainly be used as maybe like an additional textbook in a college class, but the goal is also that it's engaging enough that people outside of a college classroom would want to read it. And it is open access, so it'll be free to download and distribute. I have a donation. People can donate if they want. That helps me keep the website running and things like that. But really, I just want the information out there. And as a professor, I was privileged to be able to do that because I took a sabbatical last year to write this, to research it and write it. So in a way, I figured that's how I got paid for the book already. So
You mentioned science, adding this book as science education. That's actually something I'm really interested in, is creating science education that is kind of centered around some of the stuff you talk about in your book, as well as just teaching scientists to communicate better. Like I highlighted some stuff that I really liked about this book. Like, for example, where you say, we can't talk about what science is without talking about several other academic topics. And if I had to name some, you name some of them. You say history, philosophy, statistics, and then you talk about different traditions of history, oral histories versus like written histories. I really think that science communication is a really important part of science education. You're a professor of psychology. I'm a neuroscience background person, so we're almost in the same field, not quite, but similar. Have you taught interdisciplinarily, or are you going to give your book to students? And in what ways do you work on science communication in your day job as a psychology professor? What are your thoughts on this whole aspect of science communication?
yeah, I mean, I also wrote the book to be very broad, that it could fit within any science whatever discipline someone's in or interested in. So I'll certainly, in one of my classes, it'll be an assigned reading. But I know, like, for example, a friend, a biology professor, is going to use it too in their class. And I do, with my years of doing various types of science communication with the public, I realized that it is important that scientists, are trained to do science, but we're not really trained to communicate it well. So I do incorporate in my classes assignments that require them to practice good science communication, and also how to understand and digest the science, the science that they see out in the world, that they come across social media and things like that, right? You see all sorts of scientific claims. Psychology is a common one where there's a lot of claims being made online and social media that's not really accurate, right? So, I think it's important that people have the tools to kind of, really put to test what they see online or what they read in a newspaper about what's the actual limitations of that study, or what's actually going on. And I also, even though I'm in psychology, I've also done a lot of teaching in writing spaces, like writing classes. And so that was another reason why I incorporated the whole hero's journey. It's this very common story arc that we see across many stories. It's an engaging, tool, I guess, for writers. Because if you think of, like, the last blockbuster movies this summer was, Barbie and Oppenheimer. They both used the hero's journey story arc in it. And so I tried to write the book to kind of match that. And I say it outright, like, we're going to use this metaphor, to kind of share how a scientist is kind of on a journey themselves. So that kind of brought in the teaching, outside of psychology, but teaching writing.
I'm also very interested in teaching scientists how to communicate better. I started doing writing tutoring, and I have like 2 students right now. And a lot of times, a lot of the people that I've talked to in science, like, none of them really like writing as much as me. So I also started tutoring writing, just regular writing, as a tutor to kind of to make ends meet, because marketing budgets are down this year. And I've learned a lot about the challenges that people have with writing, and it's amazing, like, how much time I spend just telling people, like, make sure to add a comma here or take out this comma. And it's weird because my business is named Fancy Comma, and I really do spend a lot of time telling people where to put commas. And there's a lot of teaching writing that you have to do, like how to write, like writing fundamentals. But there's also, like, in the science world, there's also a lot of people don't even like to write about anything, or like they like science fiction. I mean, that's good because at least they read and stuff. But the challenge, I feel, one challenge in teaching science writing, which it sounds like you've taught science writing, is getting people to put aside the idea that they're like not good writers, or that like writing's not a thing that they can't do, because writing is a craft. You can learn writing and get better at it. So what are some of the challenges that your students have when you're teaching writing? Or do you teach writing like one-on-one, or do you teach writing in a course, or do you teach writing as part of your psychology courses? What do your courses look like, whatever you want to share about your teaching style that you really like?
There's one class where writing is a big part of it. It's like a sophomore majors course. So that's where I really put them through the ringer, having to learn the APA and technical science writing. But that's not exactly that much fun, right? I also do things, teach in like community writing workshops. The college I teach for has a really strong focus on community outreach. So we also do things like teach writing workshops for people that aren't students. And I have much more fun doing that. And that's where I get those people that maybe are outside of traditional higher education, that don't necessarily see themselves as a writer, but this gives them that opportunity to like become a writer. So I always enjoy doing that more than making people learn APA, citation styles and whatnot. But
I do APA I only write in APA citations, and I was working on a paper today, and I tutor APA citations as well. And I'm kind of torn on like whether that I feel like that's really like important, because it's the most important thing about citing your sources to me as a tutor is that you actually cite them, because that's the whole the basis of science, like using evidence, citing your sources. It's like, how much do you really get from just like telling someone where to put the parenthesis and the period versus like other life skills? I also tutor actually community college students, and I've noticed that community college students, they have a different view of the role of education in their life. Like they aren't one of the, like when you're in college, you're young, you're full of like potential. Everyone's like, you're going to be so successful when you graduate from college, or like you have this idea. As a community college student, I think that a lot of people are juggling community college with other responsibilities, like just like life, like many people are like older. So maybe it's not as useful to like tell someone like here's where like make sure to put the period here, more than like, oh, you cited your sources, like I guess that's good. Like do you find that your philosophy in teaching community college is different than, have you taught at the college level versus community college? Like is that a thing in community college to sort of like be more focused on like teaching actual life skills versus like getting things right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, community college is. I mean, it always keeps me on my toes teaching because my students are from. They kind of run the gamut. There's the very, very prepared students who are just coming to us because they, want to save some money before they transfer to a 4-year institution. There's a lot of. I get a lot of non-traditional students. We even teach at the state prison here. And that's actually my favorite classes to teach for sure. But so we get this gamut of people who they may be adults juggling work, family, things like that. A lot of English language learners. And so it keeps me on my toes that everyone's coming from a different place. So yeah, there is definitely, especially in a psychology class, I kind of front load all the topics that relate to being like a successful student. We teach in the first month. So we talk about the science of memory, the science of motivation, the science of stress, the science of sleep, and we talk about all that in the first month so that they can like use those, kind of hopefully apply it to their own life to be more successful in what they're doing. I definitely strongly, we do kind of have a general norm at my college about really encouraging a lot of writing in any class, no matter what it is, because that's a skill that will benefit someone no matter what their future looks like. Even if they don't go higher up and they don't end up going to grad school or anything, they're still going to benefit from being a confident writer and learning how to write in different situations, in their jobs and their daily life.
That's really interesting that you teach prisoners how to write. I
Yeah.
assume many people that are, so I actually, Fancy Comma, we have a sociologist, Kelly, that she did her PhD in carceral studies. And so we did a YouTube about sort of the different layers of incarceration related to, first of all, the trauma aspect and sort of the way that adverse life experiences feed back onto themselves. Also, the structural issues with the law. It's interesting. Since your name is Justice, I would say I was just yesterday attending a thing about the justice system and the courts and its intersection with science and expert testimony and stuff. But that's a really, because I don't know much about the prison system, but I know that once you get out of prison, you have less opportunities. Sometimes you can't vote. So depending on what level of crime you've had, you have different, you don't have as many rights. So it can be really empowering in general to learn to communicate and to learn to write effectively. And I think that that's a skill that really generalizes across the whole population, like whether you've spent time in prison or not. And I think that must be, what is it like do you teach people like at the prison? Do you do it via Zoom? Like, are they receptive to learning? Because there's a lot of time, you can spend a lot of time reading in prison. Are there a lot of people reading in prison? Like, what's that experience like, if you don't mind sharing
Yeah,
about
there's
that?
there's this joke we share with new instructors that are going to start teaching at the prison is these students are going to make you hate your other students because they read absolutely everything you give them and ask for more. And it sometimes can be frustrating as a professor when the student doesn't do the reading, right? But the prisoners do; they read everything. It's a bit of a self-selection because right now the program's small, so it's kind of like the top most motivated students end up in our prison education program. So it's a little self-selected. They're motivated to be there. But yeah, the students at the prison, they find it very valuable. We now have, you can get a full associate's degree. And then our local flagship kind of 4-year state institution, University of Utah, is now building up a bachelor's degree. So soon students will be able to get a full bachelor's degree while they're in prison. And the research shows that it minimizes recidivism rates. Like they're going to be less likely to reoffend when they come out. And even for the ones that are so-called lifers that aren't going to leave, or, at least not for a very long time, they still get a lot of value out of it, right? And you can see how excited they are when they like get an A on a test or something, right? That self-efficacy. And also it kind of keeps them out of trouble, keeps them occupied, because it's boring in there, which is why they read everything. And so by being able to study, it keeps them out of, getting themselves in mischief while they're in prison. So it's a good thing, and it's really growing at the federal level and in various states on creating these programs for prisoners. So.
Here in Oklahoma, our prisons are actually quite bad. Like people have been committing suicide in our prisons. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of, because I spent some time just like learning about being in prison or being in jail because I was really interested in it. And I learned that there's actually not much to being in prison other than just being there. And I recently went to a local jail to get fingerprinted for teaching. And I saw a prisoner and I actually talked to them for a second. I was just like, how are you? And they were like, oh, and I forgot they were in prison, and they were like, oh, I'm good. And it was really interesting because I forgot they were basically like, I guess, incarcerated. And I was like asking them how they're doing. They were still pretty like positive about it. So I feel like writing can be a way to kind of give prisoners hope, because I'm assuming it's kind of not fun to be in prison. And that's why I try not to break the law so that I don't have to interact with that part of the criminal justice system.
Yeah, we do teach like in the prison, so I have to go through all the process of all the clanging doors and all that. It's a scary place to walk into. I'm never scared in there with the inmates, but it's definitely not a place I would want to spend time involuntarily. That's for sure.
Like I got my fingerprints done, and the people that do my fingerprints were like the same people that like check you into jail. And I think you do get fingerprinted to go into the jail. So it was like this like kind of like these like tough ladies, and they were like just kind of like they were like this like borderline like gruff but also uncaring attitude, and they just grabbed my thumb and they just did the fingerprint. And then I was like, I really don't want to have this experience like as actual prisoner, because I just don't want to have that life experience. But actually the intersection of science communication and the justice system, which I guess we can talk about since your name is Justice, which is really interesting to me. There's actually like a lot of I'm going to write about it. I just attended this. The second day was actually today, but I had to miss it because I was doing a bunch of stuff today. But judges actually, because they're trained kind of like in the humanities tradition, they don't have that much science knowledge. So there's this whole movement to teach judges and juries science and give them science, empower them with science literacy so that they can make determinations about like, well, mostly in the civil courts, but also in the criminal courts related to like fingerprinting, like, different types of evidence that are collected. Apparently, like a lot of the science on those has not been validated like that well. So because there's a precedent for them to be submitting all this stuff in evidence, it just constantly gets accepted in evidence. But the lawyers don't have the resources to push back on that often. Or so there's this idea where judges can apparently like learn more about science so that they can be like science minded and make better decisions. And I just learned that apparently the American Psychological Association, the APA, does actually write amicus briefings. So psychologists could theoretically like help write these amicus briefings, because the APA has the general counsel that does this. And the amicus briefing is it's like a document. Amicus means like friend of the court, and you submit like basically an explainer on something to help the Supreme Court have the information to make a determination on the Supreme Court case. So that's my new goal in life, is to write amicus briefings for the Supreme Court, though I don't know how I'm going to get there. But now that I know that's like a SciComm application of criminal justice, just justice versus, well, the justice system, like SciComm. So that's a new thing, because I spent some time working in Congress. I know how science influences there. Like there are science experts that basically are like legislative assistants in the White House. They're science policy advisors. I didn't know about the judicial branch, but now I know about the judicial branch as well. So, um, have you, it sounds like you have actually worked a lot in the justice system. Um, do you have any thoughts on science communication in the justice system? Is that a weird question that I'm asking just because of
Oh
your
yeah.
name?
Yeah, I like to joke that like I fought, I considered law school, but then I was like, no, I can't do it. It's just too obvious for me to go to law school with my name. So I went into psychology instead. But yeah, I mean, I was really shocked. A book I read recently was called Junk Science by M. Chris Fabricant, and he's one of the leaders of the Innocence Project that gets people exonerated that are on death row. And that book really talks about how shockingly bad some of the science or quote unquote science is used that puts people behind bars. And it's pretty shocking that even things like fingerprints aren't really that valid of a measure, let alone all sorts of other kind of supposed evidence that's caused people to get put on death row and even executed. And it was really shocking to learn about that. So it's good to hear that there's more SciComm going into those spaces.
There is, and actually, it's honestly like at the end of yesterday, at the end of the day, one of the speakers was like, "Yeah, this has actually been a really depressing day," but because there are a lot of limitations when it comes to science, because most people that go to law school are not scientists, like with the exception of like some of my MIT friends are patent lawyers, and they're the only people that can be patent lawyers because they actually understand the technology. Like people with science background, I feel, I assume, because it's gotten more complex, but um, based on the people I knew from college debate that are now like Supreme Court clerks and stuff, those people were all kind of Ivy League people, and they were not really scientists. They were just like humanities like speaker type people where they're like dealing with ideas. I don't know if they ever got any science experience besides like taking a science course, but I'd be interested to find out what percent of like judges are scientists or have a science background. I assume it's not that much,
Yeah, it's
but
probably not much. Yeah.
I've long just kind of ignored the justice system because when I worked in Congress, one day I was crossing from this House side to the Senate side, and I saw this building, and I was like, this building is so weird. I wonder what it is. And it was actually the Supreme Court, and I didn't know that it was the Supreme Court. So that shows you how ignorant I have been to the judicial system, because it's kind of outside of I've never really thought about it because I've always been like thinking about the executive branch, like working on presidential campaigns, working in Congress. I've never even thought about the judicial system because that's just I don't feel like I really fit in the judicial system, and maybe there is just a huge need for science communicators there, and that's why, or I just have never it's never intersected with my life.
We need more humanities people reading science, and we also need science to read more about humanities, which is why like I spend a good chunk of the book talking about things like ethics, right? And those kinds of things that scientists don't always have top of mind when they probably should more often than they do. Yeah.
I think if you ask like some of these like judicial minded people about things like empiricism, which relates to the way that scientists do find knowledge, I think they really understand the theories. But I think that when it comes to the scientific method, and what really works in court cases is these like emotional appeals, like, oh, you can't let this person go free. Then they will do the crime again when it's like, well, actually, this technique that you used is like usually wrong or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if that I have this whole new sort of area of investigation in my mind unlocked that I have to go find all these like lawyers and be like, hey, how many science courses have you taken? Because lawyers are excellent communicators and they're really good at making arguments. But sometimes it can be maddening to like watch like or to watch the especially those cases where someone's been on death row for like 20 years, and over that time DNA sequencing has changed and they didn't have DNA back then, and so it's like, well, what are you really convicting this person on? Like, how can you truly have the evidence needed when like I don't and there's so many places, as Kelly, who's our sociologist, she teaches sociology at Oberlin now, she talks about all the ways that structural problems can seep in and how you need resources to be able to kind of like have good lawyers to defend you, and it all gets really depressing. And I feel like the first step is to understand the limitations of the criminal justice and other justices, the civil criminal cases. But then another step is to really apply critical thinking that we learn from science to actually critically analyze evidence, because as scientists, we do analyze evidence all the time. And if everyone could think the same way that we do, at least when it comes to like the kind of the stuff you're talking about, like test developing hypotheses and understanding, as you say, the complexity of the world and how it interacts with itself, how all the variables create cause and effect and relate to one another, I think that would really help a lot of people. So maybe lawyers and people in the justice system would do well to check out your book.
Yeah, I agree. And lawmakers too. Sometimes it can be really maddening to see some of the very anti-science laws being passed across the country right now, and not being like they're against science, but for example, here in Utah, there's a situation. There were some anti-trans bills that were being passed, and like they were just using bad science to promote them. But it's like, no, that's bad science, and here's why. I wish they would. Yeah, I wish lawmakers would read my book too. Yeah.
There's so much stuff that I want to tell lawmakers, and I have actually gone to Congress, and I've been to actually Senator Mike Lee's office, and I ate Jello there. And apparently, they have this thing where they just do. This was right when he had just been elected, and he like has this thing where everyone goes and eats Jello. Luckily, he's a supporter of science funding, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening with like transgender laws, and I think that like someone pointed this out to me, and ever since then, I haven't been able to forget it. They were like, transgender people are in the news every day. Soon, transgender people are going to organize, and then you'll find them in Capitol Hill, like advocating for their own self-interest, because I feel like they're honestly in the news every single day, and it's never actually quoting them. It's just people talking about them. And I wonder at what stages the legislative advocacy of transgender people is, and like whether they have been gotten angry enough to actually go to Congress themselves and start kind of grappling with these issues where they get mentioned every single day. But yeah, actually, I've also been to, what is the guy's name? He used to write Christmas songs or Hanukkah songs. He's old. I don't know if he's even still alive.
Orrin
He's the old
Hatch.
Orrin Hatch. I've been to his
Yeah,
office too.
he retired, and then he passed away a year or two ago. But
Yeah, I remember that. That was a bummer because he was very pro-science, and so is Senator Lee for the most part. I want to say Senator Lee and Ted Cruz are both like really into space exploration. I'm not sure of his committee assignments, but like I found his office to be really chill, and I was there 10 years ago. Maybe it's a lot more political now, but Utah members of Congress are like I think Oklahoma and Utah are kind of on the same wavelength, although Utah's more. Um, the Utah brand of Republicans is very different from like the mainstream Republicanism. Mitt Romney was the governor of Massachusetts when I was at MIT, and now he's a senator from Utah. But he's retiring now. But I wonder who's going to replace him, and hopefully it'll be another sort of reasonable pro-science person, because most Republicans, Democrats, everyone supports like biomedical science funding. The like smaller issues, maybe they don't support, but overall, science has a very bipartisan support in Congress, and it is in part due to the like people that go and advocate for science, like I did, people that work in members of Congress's offices, kind of like unpacking the science for them, because Orrin Hatch was not a scientist. Senator Lee is definitely not a scientist. I think he's like a constitutional aficionado or so, or like some kind of legal mind, and so. He is probably supports science just as much as, let's say, someone that's like on the complete other side of the aisle. The Senate is very moderate, actually. So, but yeah, it's really that all of those people, regardless of their party, could get like benefit from like a crash course in science and scientific method, and just I think the hugest need in Congress is the need for people to explain like whatever is being discussed in the bills, like the science part, and just like explain it to them. And I wonder if they're going to be able to have that to tackle some of the 21st century challenges like semiconductors and climate issues, however you want to call it, climate resilience, like I've heard that FEMA's running out of money because they no longer have money to pay for all the people that keep losing their houses due to natural disasters. So There's a lot of, and all of these issues involve science, and it's going to take a lot of effort, kind of engagement from everyone to tackle these issues. And science communication plays a huge role there. So I definitely recommend contacting your lawmakers and sort of at least keeping in touch with them on the issues. I like to call the members of the House and Senate and give them my opinions on things, like if there's a bill being considered, and just like have this conversation with them. And sometimes I say I'm an MIT graduate, and like I care this way, X, Y, and Z way about this topic in science. It's really important because whatever. And I find that Congress really does value scientific expertise as long as you're not adversarial about it and you're not like, for example, like if you're like really Democrat, like liberal, and you call like your Tea Party lawmaker, at least try to be polite because they make the big decisions. And at the end of the day, there's a lot we actually have in common with our lawmakers, even if we don't have the same views on like everything. We might find points of agreement with them, for example, on the importance of science. So that was my random spiel and ramble.
No, yeah, I agree. I also, through my job, I've taught public kind of workshops on how to contact your elected officials. And so I talk about how you can incorporate science well into when you write letters to your Congress people or mayor or whoever it might be. So yeah, I've taught those to the general public, those workshops. Lawmakers are forced into a situation where they're supposed to make big decisions about things they have no idea about, right? So being that person with some information they should know can be very helpful sometimes if they'll listen. So this is like for the general public, and you know we focus more on local stuff because you're also more likely to get heard by someone at the state or lower level. But it applies to kind of everything. But yeah, we have what's called the Community Writing Center, and it's just a part of the college that's like outward focusing towards the community, where we offer workshops in libraries and things like that. And of one of the workshops that we run, and I taught it many times, is what we call Writing for Change. So it's just teaching people the most effective way of contacting their elected officials for whatever reason they want to. And we talk about how do you represent the science well, because you know if you overwhelm them with statistics, that's going to kind of not go over as well as just giving them like a couple key points, right? Things like that. Yeah.
I didn't realize you were involved in science policy. That's something I really care about. And I feel like teaching science communication actually helps people interface with their lawmakers better. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to do so because in science, we're constantly complaining, like, oh, did you see what so and so did, like in Congress the other day? And then it's like, if you don't actually like call them and say, hey, I actually don't like this, then that kind of stuff is just going to keep happening because we elected these people and they really value our input. And that's why,
Yeah.
especially when I worked in Congress, I know that every single phone call that we got, we tracked it, we took note of people's positions. That's what we use to issue our statements because at the end of the day, the Congress serves the people that elected them. So it's not like the members of Congress, at least based on my experience, I really felt like government really truly was receptive to the needs of the governed. So that, but the important part is to actually be involved in the political process. I personally am obsessed with politics. I have worked on presidential campaigns. I have written talking points for candidates, all with the kind of goal of helping advance science, like, or have like difficult conversations with the goal of kind of unifying people. Um, and like there's a lot of places for scientists to get involved in the political process. About science communication or community college teaching or all the different things you're doing. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation and especially the focus on science policy. And it was cool to talk about the justice system with you since your name is Justice. And I look forward to examining the interactions of science communication and the judicial system more fully.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I learned a lot. It's kind of cool to learn about the side of the lawmaking and things that you worked on and lobbying, but we need a lot more of that. That's for sure.
That is definitely true. Um, Thank you so much for stopping by. This was a wonderful conversation. I think that um, hopefully our viewers really enjoyed this and look forward to seeing your book published.
Yeah, it'll be out any day now. I keep finding more typos, so it's just doing final polishing. But then uh, this weekend or next week, it should be out on the website for people to download for free and read. So my hope too is probably in about a year, I'll do a second edition after I get all the feedback about, what was missing, what typos did I still miss, those kinds of things. And then again, then I'll release a second edition in a year or so after I get, so that's another thing is I want people to give me feedback on it. I see it kind of almost like because it's free and open access, like a living document where, I can get feedback and change it, make it better, just like we do in science. So.
Awesome. This is an awesome project, and the important part is to write something, as you know, since you're writing, teach writing, then you got to edit and then improve it from there. But has some good stuff. It's a lot of words. So, but it's like, if you really like learning about science and the theories of knowledge, you will love this book. So we'll definitely link to it in the description box. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Justice Morath. It was a pleasure having you on our YouTube channel.
Thank you.